Hello everybody, welcome to Life and Life Only. I'm very happy to have with me today Ricky Green of the University of Kent. Ricky co-authored a paper on conspiracy theories with Karen Douglas, who's a name that some of you may know. And Ricky and I will be having a very friendly discussion about conspiracy theories and what that means. And I've already informed him in advance that I have a different position to him, but it's all good debate. And so, Ricky, well, first of all, sorry, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
I look forward to the discussion.
Yep. All right. First of all, so what we need to do, so you wrote this paper. I'm going to get onto that in a second, but we're going to start with something that a lot of people have tried to do, which is define exactly what a conspiracy theory is. So would you like to just give me your definition? I'll give you mine, and we'll see where we meet in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, sure. There's like working definitions in the literature at the moment. And again, even within academia, it's quite hard to define exactly what it is. But conspiracy theories tend to explain the ultimate causes of significant events that happen around the world, whether they're social or political, and then make claims of secret plots by nefarious actors, and that could be government actors, or not just government, but, think pharmaceutical and groups and things like that. So that tends to be what the running definition is of a conspiracy theory in the psychological literature anyway.
Yeah, there is a definition, something to do with clandestine operations by secret groups. And we tend to think of serious events because, of course, have you ever heard of Dr. Dentith? Have you ever come across that name?
Yes, he's a researcher as well, right?
Yeah, because he was on a podcast of a friend of mine, Julian Charles. He's got a really good podcast called The Mind Renewed that I've been on. Dr. Dentith wrote a book called, I think it was called Taking Conspiracy Theories Seriously. And he was jokingly saying, you could say that organizing a birthday party, a surprise birthday party for someone is a conspiracy, in the literal sense of the word.
Yeah, it's very true.
My argument that I'd like to put forward today is that the phrase itself has been weaponized. And in fact, I wrote a piece for my blog many years ago, and it came out to about 30 pages. I did an audio version that was about an hour, and it was talking about the phrase rather than the phenomenon. And I've got quite a few arguments for that, which we'll get into. I'm also an English teacher, and I know as well as anyone that defining words is problematic, because Collins Dictionary will have a definition, but then the working use of it and the popular use, just to give you an example, anarchy technically means no government. But of course, if you ask anyone what anarchy means, it means confusion and chaos. So the message being given there sort of implicitly, that's almost been weaponized. So the idea that you couldn't have a government necessarily equates to anarchy and confusion. Now, you said to me in one of your emails that you used to be into conspiracy theories. So if you don't mind me asking the question, that kind of makes it sound a bit like it's a disease that you got over. And I just mean this in a very friendly way. But can you tell me what changed your belief? And is it an either or? Do you have to be into conspiracy theories or not? Or is there a middle ground?
I think there is a middle ground. I wasn't really heavily into them, but it was kind of when I was younger, to be honest, 19, 20. And I was with my friends and we watched, a lot of videos, and they were quite entertaining as well. I think that's something that draws people in. Conspiracy theories are quite entertaining.
Yes. And
I guess I was like kind of entertaining them, right? But then I did have a level of belief as well. And I'm talking about, I don't know if you heard of a video called Zeitgeist.
Peter Joseph.
Yeah. So he's got 3 of them out. So I was, watching them, and we'd watched them, more than once. And it's really intriguing and interesting. And, I had a somewhat of a belief in some of the theories they're proposing. But it's quite hard to say when I stopped being into conspiracy theories, and I don't mean it in a sense that it was like a disease that I've kind of got rid of. But to be honest, like it could have been, the way that I was thinking about the world because of these videos, it could have been quite bad for me. I could have been very pessimistic about the world and things like that. So I'm kind of happy that I'm not kind of too into this school of thought anymore. How it stopped, I can't really pinpoint a time in my life when I suddenly went, I don't really believe this stuff anymore. One thing I will say is that I started university quite late, so I'm doing a PhD now, and I'm just at the end of it. When I say late, I mean just a little bit later. And so it's the age of 24, and I think it was like through that process of learning how to think critically that I just started to see that if you look back on Zeitgeist, especially the first videos, a lot of the claims are actually verifiably false. maybe not everything, but there is a lot of false claims in there. And even if it has a few truthful bits in there, it kind of is ruined by the fact that it allowed lots of falsities to be portrayed in the Zeitgeist film. So I kind of just look at my sources a lot more critically now, and most conspiracy type of information I come across, I look at it critically and I come to a conclusion that, you know, I can't believe in this sort of stuff anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand. But again, all I'd say is that, well, let me give you my position. And I was really happy. I was listening to a podcast recently. He said, I don't trust people who think there are no conspiracies, and I don't trust people who think everything's a conspiracy. So I'm somewhere in the middle, you know. And let me ask a question. So when you were watching Zeitgeist, would it be fair to say that at that time you weren't actually researching it? And I agree with you. It's glamorous, you know. I mean, I know Alex Jones is a complete clown now, but in 2008, Alex Jones was actually disseminating some fairly good information if you could get underneath the kind of WWF style. Would you say at that time that you perhaps weren't researching things? You were kind of watching documentaries and...
To begin with, yes. But actually, there was a time that shortly just before I left, so I was working in retail after school, and one store that I moved to, and this is after I'd gotten into Zeitgeist, this other manager that I was working with, he was heavy into conspiracy theories, and it actually dominated his life. He had files and folders on countries and what they were doing and stuff like that. He was very heavy into it. So that actually, you know, I myself wasn't doing research, but I actually befriended someone who was very heavy into it and was feeding me a lot of his own research.
Got it.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I wasn't really doing my own research at that time, but I was getting heavy into it in a point where it wasn't just the videos. I was speaking with someone else who was doing their research, and I was talking to them about it and things like that. And yeah, that's probably when it was quite heavy, when I was kind of into the conspiracy theories back then. But yeah, I hadn't really ever done my own research. It was more just watching these videos and speaking to friends and things.
Right, totally understand. Yeah. All I'd say about Zeitgeist is that, as you said, there's 3 films. I think the third film, do you remember Zeitgeist Moving Forward? I mean, that seems very well sourced. And it
I
seems
like that one.
Yeah, there's a lot of doctors and psychologists. I actually very briefly met Peter Joseph at an event in London, and he has said that he's somewhat embarrassed by some of the first film. Obviously, the religious stuff, I mean, whether that's true or not, you are just opening a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
So, you know, the religious stuff, I honestly don't know because I'm not particularly religious. 9/11, we could talk about it later if you want. But the stuff about, for example, the Federal Reserve, I mean, it is absolutely factually accurate that the Federal Reserve was set up at a secret meeting in Georgia, Jekyll Island in Georgia. So all I really want to do today is just to discuss with you the idea that there is a middle ground and that there are conspiracy researchers who are sometimes very esteemed, you know, and they spend 5 or 10 years researching a book. So I think what I'm trying to get at today really is, when are you, quote unquote, diagnosed a conspiracy theorist? So if you're a person that had lots of depressive episodes, for example, there'd be a point where a doctor would diagnose you with depression. So I know this sounds facetious, but it's an honest question. At what point does someone get tagged as a conspiracy theorist? Is it to do with a general mindset, or is it that they believe in more than 5? It's honestly not a jokey question. I mean it sincerely.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I would say that, I mean, a diagnosis would come, I guess, if it just, you know, taking it away from conspiracy belief at the moment, but someone would be diagnosed if there's an issue going on and it's going to affect their life, right? And that's when I would say that, you know, someone is a conspiracy theorist to the point where it could be problematic, you know, because there's relationships that are being lost, you know, within families, you know, especially with QAnon, you know, people who are drawn into that. If it affects their work, you know, if it gives them a much more pessimistic view on the world, and if it makes them feel anxious, you know, about the world and things like that. When conspiracy theories get a hold of you like that, that's when I would say they're a conspiracy theorist. But I mean, anyone can be a conspiracy theorist, right? Like if we have an idea of something that we think is going on, doesn't necessarily have to be about 9/11 or the economic system and things like that. In fact, there's an evolutionary argument as well for like being conspiracy theorizing. Like if we don't think like this, then we aren't prepared for the things that could come, right? So it's actually, it's an adaptive. That's what some researchers are arguing at the moment, is that we all have this in us to be looking out for bad things that are going to happen. Because if we're not, then bad things are going to happen to us.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've spent the majority of human life has been in tribes. And if you have a tribe right next door to you and you don't theorize that they're probably conspiring to kill you, then you're crazy. You'll be dead in 5 minutes. You've got to at least be open to that idea. So I can see your point of view perfectly, that there are people out there, and I've met them. And as you said, often young people, young and impressionable, let's say, that can happen for sure. All I'm saying is that I think the definition itself is problematic, and there's a tendency to lump lots of people together. Now, I wanted to, I was researching a little bit of Karen Douglas, and I don't want to make the presumption that your views concur with hers. I mean, you were involved in this paper with her, but I was slightly aghast watching something. There was a conspiracy theories conference. Again, it was 2012. It's a long time ago. I don't know if her view is nuanced, but she kind of says at the beginning of her talk, I'm not actually interested in whether these are true or not, which was something of a red flag. And then she put 2 pictures of Paul McCartney. Do you know the Paul McCartney conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge I've actually got a podcast about John Lennon, so this is my wheelhouse. So there's a theory that he died in 1966. Again, I've never really met anyone who actually believes that, but she put 2 pictures on the board of Paul McCartney and said, I don't know if conspiracy theories are true, but that looks like Paul McCartney. But what she's doing, you see, is she's using that one theory as a kind of a straw man, as a sort of blanket phrase. And QAnon, again, I don't believe in QAnon. And you're absolutely right. There are people who are impressionable people who will be taken in by that. I just think there's so much more to this. Yeah, the sort of traditional straw men that are generally trotted out is flat earth, Elvis, AIDS was created in a factory. COVID-19 was created in a factory. And another thing, this is something from your paper, it's got tagged to the right wing. Now, what do you actually understand by right wing or right wing authoritarian? Because the actual origin of right wing is just that in the French Parliament, if you sat to the right of Louis XVI, you were pro-authority, let's say, pro the king. And if you sat to the left, you wanted to reduce the powers of the king. So what's your understanding of right wing in terms of how it was used in your paper?
Well, in that paper, it was just used to show that, because the main thing in that paper I was looking at attachment styles, and what we did in that paper was right-wing authoritarianism has been shown in previous research to predict higher conspiracy beliefs. So the reason it was included in that study is to show that attachment anxiety predicts these beliefs as well over and above other known predictors. So it was kind of like put in there to show that this new variable that we're looking at, attachment anxiety, stands out above, right-wing authoritarianism. But RWA, that right-wing authoritarianism, it's not, basically conspiracy theories aren't just for people on the right, it is, we know that now, and it's for people on the left, even in the middle. But there is research that does show that conspiracy beliefs, whether they're beliefs on the left or the right, it tends to be, if they're on the extreme left and right, that's when you tend to have higher conspiracy belief. Basically the right-wing conspiracy beliefs might be that the left are doing stuff against the right. It's just these extreme views, basically. And I think that's what the right-wing and even the left-wing element of conspiracy theorizing is about. It's about the extreme of these views, and they believe that the other group, the other side, is conspiring against them.
Yeah, so it's to do with extremists, really. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I'm only asking that because we get so used to hearing left and right, and people will say the left and the right, but it's actually very difficult to get a precise definition. That's the only reason I mentioned it, because essentially in mainstream media, for example, the climate change issue. Okay. Now, I'm not a climate change denier. I've looked at the issue. It seems like an incredibly detailed and complex issue. But if you notice, it's been allied that the right believes that climate change isn't real and the left believes that it is.
Yeah, that's one of these left and right divides, conspiracy.
Yeah. But do you not think that that's a kind of a divide and conquer strategy? What do you think?
No, I think it's just there is evidence for that. Like there is data that shows that people who report that they are more right-wing than left-wing, they score higher on these beliefs. There are left-wing people who believe that climate change is false. It's not definitive, right? Like, but it tends to be that the more right-wing you are, the more likely it is, going by the data, and there's lots of data that shows this as well, that people who say that they're right-wing are more likely to believe that climate change is false, whereas people left-wing tend to believe that it's real.
All right, yeah. Again, I'm not questioning your research. I'm questioning the actual the word itself, because it's, again, if you go to somebody in the street and you say, "Oh, are you a liberal or conservative?" They might say, "Oh, I'm a liberal." My argument is that perhaps people don't actually know, which I know sounds awfully patronizing, but again, I've worked with activist groups, and we used to stand on Oxford Street and we had a sign saying, "We have important questions, see me," kind of thing, making a joke of, at school when the headmaster says, "See me." We did that, and we would ask people about that, and we would say, "Do you identify as liberal or conservative?" And they'd say, "Oh, liberal." What does that actually mean? And I'm not sure people actually know. And I don't blame them, because I don't know really. Things that I don't think you have to be paranoid to believe in divide and conquer, because I think people have been doing that for thousands of years.
Well, just on your point that people don't really know, I mean, you're not far off the truth there. When I was doing my master's, we was doing, so it's like political psychology that I was doing. And there were some modules that were just pure political science, and it was on public opinion. And it was about how people don't really have an opinion sometimes, and they don't. And you're right in saying that, if you ask someone whether they're left or right and then asking what does that mean,
what does it mean?
They might not be able to articulate it to you. But it's not just as simple as being left and right. There's something else we know now. There's like economic left and right, and there's social left and right. And actually, if you were to ask people, how do you feel about this issue? How do you feel about this issue? Then you probably get to where they are actually politically, right? And then they might be surprised. They might be like, "Oh, okay, I am left socially, but I'm actually right economically," something like that. Yeah. So what do you mean about the divide and conquer? Do you think that media use this left and right issue then, or
I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's been written about in philosophy books for years. I mean, Machiavelli's only 500-600 years ago. Divide and conquer is a strategy where the powerful will find ways to divide the masses, so to speak, and get them fighting amongst themselves. And God, I'm so hesitant to mention David Icke, because the listeners were probably going, "Lizards, reptilians." Yeah. David Icke said something very interesting. He said, "We've out-sheeped the sheep because sheep need a sheepdog to keep them in line. We keep each other in line." And the point he made is that if you try and be different in our society, it's not the government you got to worry about. It's all the people in your office at work. This tends to happen because I've seen it myself. Divide and conquer, essentially, if you take Brexit, I'm not going to ask your views on Brexit. Again, very, very complex issue. You could probably spend 5 years studying it. But what happened was that two camps emerged, and then you get this playing on the tribal instincts of people. You get people fighting against each other. So that's what I mean by divide and rule.
I think that's just politics, though, right? That's just politics.
Yeah, but it's politics using divide and rule to keep things more or less the same. That's my argument.
Yeah, okay.
Because I've heard people having discussions, and someone pointed out politicians had conspired to get some paper through, and they said, "Yeah, but that's just politicians lying, or that's just corruption." So I think what it comes down to in the end, probably the conclusion we're going to reach today, is that it's very difficult to actually define it.
Yeah. Because I was going to say to you, where I'm at now, because as I said, I used to entertain them years ago when I was a bit younger, and these ideas have drifted away. Well, I have come to a bit of a realization that a lot of things, especially in economic terms and how the world works, is, there are meetings behind closed doors, by business leaders, CEOs, politicians, and they're trying to make change in how they want their business to be, how they want their country to be, how they want the world to be, right? And these things do happen. And I just think that conspiracy theories are mistaken as that, right? And that's what I meant as it's just politics, Like, I totally understand. If I was the leader of one of the two Leave or Remain sides, then I would be sitting with, my other advisors, politicians, and saying, right, how can we get all of the people to vote in this way? And I think that's just politics. Right?
Kind of propaganda.
But as you said, I mean, it's not good, like the things that come about, like the culture wars that happen because of Brexit and things like that. There is some dividing going on, and ultimately some conquering when one side wins. But I think as you're getting to the main point, it is hard to define when is it a conspiracy theory and
absolutely
is it just normal life.
Because I had a weird experience. I used to work in an office, and I'm sure I was tagged as the office weirdo. And you know, when a new person joins an office, or it could be an academic situation, and they introduce you to everyone. They probably were just saying, "Oh, this is Antony, that weirdo," blah blah blah. So I used to argue with someone who used to laugh. This is a very common thing as well. Oh, everything's a conspiracy, Or we were supposed to meet at a coffee shop and it happened to be closed, and he'd say, "Oh, you think that's a conspiracy," But then when I proved something to him, I was absolutely blown away by his response. And he said, "Yeah, but that's fact." So what he was saying was that if you prove that conspiracy is a fact rather than a theory, then you can still disparage conspiracy theories, because what I've proved to him is now a conspiracy fact. Can you see that that's quite a weird...
Yeah, but that's when the conspiracy theory transitions to, as to what he's saying. It's no longer a conspiracy theory. Like you was quoting someone earlier, a friend of yours or something, that they don't trust anyone who doesn't believe in any conspiracy theories. And they don't trust anyone that believes every conspiracy theory.
That's kind of my view. That's my view.
No, that was your view. Sorry. Okay.
It was taken from a podcast, but it kind of chimed it chimes with me. That's more or less where I've come to. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think people would be naive to think that conspiracies don't happen. I mean, they do happen, and they've been found out. If you think of Watergate. But then again, it's not seen as a conspiracy theory anymore, right?
Exactly.
But once upon a time, it was. It was just a conspiracy theory, like back then, when people were accusing Nixon, I believe it is, of the scandal. There was lots of talk like that's just conspiracy theory. But then it came out that it was actually true. And then it's no longer a conspiracy theory anymore. So there is that. But yeah, that is interesting. And yeah, so, these things do happen, but until they are found out, they are just conspiracy theories, but when they are proven to be fact, then they're no longer a conspiracy theory. It's the truth.
Yeah, it's a real semantic kind of puzzle, or not a puzzle, it's a mess, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I came to this actually quite late in my life. And I'll admit, you're absolutely right. I was taken in by Zeitgeist and Alex Jones and David Icke, because it's glamorous. It gives you a nice feeling that you're finally getting the truth, because you've been confused about the world for so long, or I was anyway. But then I got through that kind of gung-ho period, and I started to think, I want to actually research the world. Now, I'm not a full-time researcher, I have my work and everything else I do on my podcast and everything. It takes up so much of my time that I don't do as much as I would like. I would love to do this full-time for 6 months to actually try and find out what the world's actually like, because I don't think I know either. When I work with activist groups, I found on average 10 to 20% of them were maybe the people that you are discussing in your paper, that they're, they do kind of latch on to anything, and they probably are looking for something in their life. I totally get that. But I just found the majority of people were pretty damn reasonable. And another thing that I have a little bit of a problem with is the idea that conspiracy theories are looking for certainty, because I would say conspiracy researchers, they're almost the opposite. We all say, like, we don't know how the world works. We're trying our damn hardest to find out. And, Socrates said, wisdom is knowing what you don't know. And that's really what I've discovered. It's like if you go to, if you went to live in China or Japan, because I used to live in the Far East, what you find is the more you try and understand the culture, all it does is bring up more questions. My friend has spent 10 years in Japan, and he said, I know a little bit, but essentially I've got more questions than I had when I started. If I could just ask you about the paper, could you tell us a little bit about the research method? Who are your case studies? And could you just tell me how that works?
Yeah, sure. So it's cross-sectional research. It means basically it's a survey that I handed out online with American and British participants. So we did that to see if what we found is also replicated in, a different group of people. Around about 300 participants in each sample, in each study. And basically they answer a questionnaire. And these questionnaires tap into, what's called like psychological constructs. These are things that I can't get a ruler out and measure, because they're in your mind, right? It's your personality traits, basically. And one of the best tools that we have at the moment, although it's not most ideal, like as I said, if I could really just measure it with something physical, that would be the best, but we can't. So we have to deal with what we have, and that is creating these sets of questions which tap into these different constructs. And one of them is belief in conspiracy theories. And basically for that one, we use this measure, this general conspiracy belief scale. And it has 15 statements in there that tap into different types of conspiracy theories. This one doesn't actually ask specific conspiracy theories, but it just asks, like, you know, do you think that governments do
like nefarious things?
Nefarious things, you know. It doesn't, but actually saying that, in the second study, we do use specific conspiracy theories as well, and we find the same results. The other main thing that I was looking at, and what that paper is based on, is attachment styles. So we have, this is like a type of personality trait that we all have. And but an attachment style is how you approach relationships, how you feel with relationships, family and friends and things like that. And, you know, it might not make sense that why would this be related to conspiracy belief? Well, hopefully it will once I finish what I'm saying. And basically, majority of people, around about 60, 70% in some cases, what the data shows is that most of us tend to be secure. We have a secure attachment style, which means that we feel good about ourselves in relationships, but we also feel good about others. We trust other people. So these are the two elements. And if you feel positive about yourself and positive about others, like they're trusting, then you have a secure attachment style, basically. And we find that that is not associated with high conspiracy belief. It's also not associated with low conspiracy belief. There's just no relationship. There's another attachment style called avoidant, and that means that you have a negative views of others, but you can have positive views about yourself. So you're fine with yourself, but you just don't like others. So you're kind of avoidant. You don't really want to have relationships with people. You don't want to get close to people. And then a third attachment style, broad one, which is what I look at, is attachment anxiety. So that means that you actually do have positive views of others, but you have negative views about yourself. So you do want relationships, but you're worried, you know, you just have negative views about yourself. You feel like you're not worthy to have relationships and things like that. And people with attachment anxiety, because they don't feel good about themselves, they tend to like basically as a way of getting attention, you know, or support from significant others, because they do want these relationships, but they just feel like they're not worthy and things like that. But one of the strategies that they use to get attention is catastrophizing. They tend to, where it could be pain, stress, anything that's going on, it seems to be 10 times worse than what it is for people with attachment anxiety.
Dramatizing would be another thing of that, I suppose.
Something like that. Basically.
Creating drama. We've all known those people. Absolutely.
And so basically, that was my conclusion as to why attachment anxiety is associated with conspiracy belief. And research that I'm doing my PhD, I've been looking into it a lot more now. So this paper was out 2018, and my PhD, I've done about 10 studies now, 10 different studies, specifically on that relationship, but also now looking at this other variable, catastrophizing. And we've measured it like stress catastrophizing, pain catastrophizing, social situation catastrophizing. So like, for instance, asking people to read a scenario like you're doing a talk in front of a lot of people that you don't know, and you're starting to think that they are thinking that you're talking a lot of rubbish or something like that. And then we ask them, you know, if you were in that situation, how bad would it be? And we find that people with attachment anxiety, you know, they think the situation is going to be a lot worse, you know, higher than people secure, etc. And this relates to conspiracy belief, which I found. So pain, catastrophizing, stress, and social situations are associated with increased conspiracy belief through this attachment anxiety. So that's the gist of it.
Is that people self-identifying as having those attachment styles?
Well, self-identifying. So the measure of attachment is a psychometrically built. So there's a lot of work gone into these measures, like lots of papers upon papers before I've used this scale. It's a psychometrically validated scale, basically. And there's 36 statements in there, and participants are asked whether they agree or disagree, whether these statements apply to them or not. And there's 18 that tap into anxious statements and 18 that tap into like avoidant type of statements. And basically how you score on them two will determine your attachment style. So it's not that they are saying I have attachment anxiety. They might not realize that they have attachment anxiety, but how they answer these sets of questions would tell me, as best as it can do, their attachment style.
So it goes from slightly strongly disagree to slightly disagree? Is it one of those where you've got...
So, yeah, it's a 7-point scale, actually.
Oh,
so it's
7
from
point.
7. So from strongly disagree to strongly agree that, this statement reflects me.
Yeah, because I think those psychometric, like personality tests, they're often derided because they're too general, of course. But there's actually some quite sophisticated ones now. I mean, it's a different thing to what you were studying, but just to say, and I always found the trick with filling out those is to try and answer before you've thought about it.
Yeah, don't get with it. There's a lot of noise when collecting data like this that we are aware of, like, what you've just said there, someone could choose a certain point on the scale, but then change their mind. And, what does that mean, right? Like, where do they actually sit on that particular statement? But, these things are like accounted for, and there's a lots of statistical processes, like the statistics software that I use. There's lots of theory that goes behind all the processes in that account for all these things, and basically it tells you how confident you can be in your data, and how much noise there is and things like that in it. Absolutely. But what I would say is that I've done 10 studies now above that paper that we're talking about. So that paper from 2018, I've got another 10 studies, and I consistently find these relationships. Attachment anxiety predicts conspiracy belief, and so does this tendency to catastrophize. In the 10 studies I've done, it's like 2,600 participants that I think I've got all together now.
Oh, interesting. You don't have to go into specifics of the questions, but do you question them about theories in general? Do you focus on particular ones? Because I think if you ask someone what they believed in, I don't know, flat Earth, and then ask them about, I don't know, the JFK assassination, obviously you're going to get different answers. Are there any particular theories that you focused on, or was it more of a, what's your mindset, is it?
Yeah, basically the scale that I mentioned earlier, the general conspiracist belief scale, which I'm just bringing up some of the statements now, and I can let you know.
Oh, yeah, please, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But what I would say is, in that paper, the one that you read in the 2018 one, we did measure 9/11. Do you believe that 9/11 was an inside job? Do you believe that AIDS was created in a factory? Do you believe that climate change isn't real? So we do actually, in that paper that you've got there, measure actual conspiracy theories, but we find the same pattern of results, whether we either look at the general statements or whether we look at the specific statements. So because of that, in all of the studies that I've done now, which I'm just going to show you how we've measured it, we basically use this general conspiracist belief scale. Just bringing up some of the items now. Yeah, so for instance, I mean, these might sound specific because they do allude to certain conspiracy theories, but they don't actually talk about any specific ones. So here's one of them here. So the government is involved in the murder of innocent citizens and or well-known public figures and keeps this a secret. So that's one statement.
Do you want my response?
Well, you can, yeah.
The government is responsible for the killing of innocent people. I'd have to strongly agree with that, I'm afraid, but that's based on a lot of research.
Yeah, to be honest, I guess it might also depend on which government you're thinking about.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
I mean, there are definitely governments out there that do these things, but I guess if we're thinking about the UK, maybe. I won't go through all of them, but I mean, unless you're interested, then
go on, just give me a couple, yeah.
Okay, cool. The power held by heads of state is second to that of small unknown groups who really control world politics.
I don't believe in smoky rooms full of 10 people, but I think there's think tanks such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, and that's all fairly well sourced. So I'd have trouble. I wouldn't be able to do the survey. I'd be somewhere in the middle, I'm afraid. But
yeah, cool. Well, yeah, so on this scale, just for your listeners and for yourself as well, this is scored on a 5-point scale. So there's 5 names to choose from, and it ranges from definitely not true, probably not true, and in the middle is not sure, can't decide, and then probably true, and then definitely true. So that's how it's measured. So as you were saying, that it does have a range in here, so it's not all just political types of statements here. And having that range, I mean, it just helps to validate the scale in itself. Yeah. So, yeah, here's another one. Evidence of alien contact is being concealed from the public.
I probably don't have enough interest in it, in that particular strand, you know. I do know there's an agency in America that actually collects UFO sightings. And this is about 10 years ago, they reported that they'd had about 200,000 sightings of what could be UFOs. Also, you know, I'm sure you've heard of Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker. He always made the point that there's trillions and trillions of stars and planets. And the idea that we know for sure that there's no one living on those is somewhat, I don't know, complacent perhaps. So I wouldn't be able to do the scale because I think my answers would just, I'd probably end up writing 10 pages for each one. So. But no,
yeah, I can imagine it'd be quite difficult, depending if you have, if you've got a lot of faults on some of these statements, then it might not be as easy as just saying probably true or, If
I could just make a very general point. We were saying just earlier about people don't actually know what right wing or left wing means. I don't believe there's many people that research things particularly deeply. And you don't have to give me your opinion on that. But we used to ask questions and we'd say, have you ever heard of this? And we'd bring up something. Do you know what the Gulf of Tonkin incident is, for example?
You have to remind me. It sounds familiar.
What it was is that when America had some involvement in Vietnam in the early 60s.
I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. It's the Tonkin Gulf in Vietnam. And again, this was admitted by McNamara, who was, I think he was the defense secretary under Kennedy and under Johnson, that they had faked some intelligence that some PT boats, Vietnamese PT boats, had attacked American boats. And that was their pretext for going into Vietnam. Okay. Now that was proved to be a lie, but I don't think, and I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't heard of that, because I just think the average man on the street or woman on the street who will just watch his mainstream news probably has never heard of that, but it's out there. And the thing about it is also people will say, people on the internet, but do you know anyone who doesn't use the internet apart from, somebody's granny or a 5-year-old child,
99% of people must be using the internet.
Yes, that's another slight kind of beef I have. Again, because I don't really watch mainstream news, and it's not because I think none of it's true. I just think it leads people. It's leading the public.
Generally speaking, you're right. I think that there's a lot of people that just aren't bothered about these things, and they just want to get on with their life,
Absolutely.
And there's people that don't really catch up with the news or anything. And that comes down to what was mentioned earlier when I was in this public opinion module doing political science. And it was about, how do you sway people if you're a politician or if you want to measure public opinion? But so many people say they don't, I have no opinion on this. I have no opinion on this because they just aren't researched on it. So it's not wrong to what you're saying. Like, I think, and because they're just not that bothered necessarily, right? Which isn't a bad thing. Like, people can lead their lives how they want. They don't have to be informed.
Sure.
It's helpful to be informed. But yeah, just on that, I'm glad that you brought up that Vietnam false flag, kind of what it is, right? Yeah. And I bring that up often because it's understandable why people can get drawn into these theories because there's kernels of truth in them. There's things that have actually happened in the past. So Watergate's one of them. Like, governments do nefarious things, and false flag operations for America, at least, is something that has been talked about. Like, I don't think it's actually being carried out, but there is another one as well. I think with Cuba that they had basically exactly what you were describing. I think it's called Operation Northwood or something.
Northwoods.
It was basically just the exact same thing, right, as the Vietnam thing. Let's create loads of chaos and stuff like that, and we're blaming it on Cuba, right? And
they were going to use a drone and then apparently shoot down a plane and blame it on Cuba.
And this is now on record, and as you said, if people do get round to it and they see these things, and there's evidence there that, for the US as an example, has acted in these ways, in ways that people, point finger at America today and say, look, there's stuff going on right now. And I totally understand why people can think like that, especially if they've done that research and they found them little kernels of truth, But I just say that, it's hard to know. It's really hard to know. Like, as much research as you can do to get to the real truth, it's kind of impossible unless you're in the government, and you have that intelligence and things like that.
Yeah, and all those people in power, they're so compromised. Have you ever seen Yes Minister? Have you ever watched any episodes of that?
Yeah, when I was younger, but I can't really remember any of it.
Well, there was a kind of a spiritual sequel, which is The Thick of It. I imagine you've probably seen some of it.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What it was with Yes Minister, it's strange to look back because I watched all the episodes and I wrote a very long essay, if you want to call it that, blog post on it. It's absolutely fascinating because it's essentially a BBC comedy on mainstream TV in the 70s and 80s that's actually, in a way, laying out exactly why things never really change. Now, things do change. Brexit has happened. I probably wouldn't have predicted that. Donald Trump got into office. I don't even think Donald Trump predicted that, honestly. I don't even think he wanted to be president.
No.
I just think he's probably like a bored billionaire who loves himself a bit too much and thought, it'd be fun to run for office. Anyway, but Yes Minister, yeah, it's a mainstream program, but it's just laying out, it's essentially a battle between a sort of idealistic politician and the creaking civil service. And the civil service essentially works for whichever side is in power. So the top civil servant works for the Prime Minister, whether it's Margaret Thatcher or, I was going to say Tony Blair, but he was very close to Margaret Thatcher. Let's take, I don't know, Jeremy Corbyn, if he'd become PM. So let's say somebody ideologically different. And their whole thing is to do with maintaining the status quo. And they have all these brilliant ways to do it. And they have these like 10,000 page documents. No one's ever going to be able to read them, even if you have the time. They're impossible to read. You know, and he says to the minister, it's really funny, they give the minister all these red boxes to read. Now, this is your homework for tonight. The minister's completely exhausted reading all this. And they said, have you read the document, minister? He's like, I read the first like 200 pages. Here's a one-page summary. And essentially, like, the civil service is always one step or three steps ahead because they know how this works. They know how to keep things more or less the same. So I think the only people that might know the truth, I think, are too compromised to share it. That's one of the things kind of frustrating and sometimes quite fascinating about the world. You know, how does the world work? And yeah, you're probably right. I mean, there's certain people that don't necessarily want to know. But, you know, I would argue that, let's say, the conventional worldview, not only does the conventional worldview tend to dominate, but people will leap on anyone who's got an alternative view and often get quite angry, or they'll either like take the piss out of them or they'll start getting angry with them. And I've seen this, you know. Let's change tack a little bit. Let's just talk about like general worldviews. Again, not necessarily connected to your paper, but I'd love to know your opinions anyway. It's a skeptical worldview that may or may not take in conspiracy theories, or maybe it's just skeptical. Do you think that's healthy or unhealthy?
I think we say it quite a lot in the literature as well. There's healthy skepticism, right? And that might come down to what I was saying earlier about the possible adaptive function of conspiracy believing, right? Like that it actually might benefit us. So, you know, as we said, it'd be naive to not have some level of skepticism, I think. And, you know, well, with the current government, like at the moment as well, like it's with a lot of the issues that have been going on. I mean, there's so much going on at the moment. It's hard to keep track of a lot of the issues. But there was,
of course,
it was during the pandemic, obviously, and it was about, basically all of these deals that have been going on, all the contracts that have been given out by the government because of the pandemic, £36 billion for test and trace, and all these other dodgy looking contracts that have been given out to, you know, what seems like friends or people that are close to the ministers and the government, basically. So, you know, you see all of this stuff and, you know, you can't help but be super skeptical of anything that they're going to do now, right?
Yeah, I really think you should be.
Yeah.
In a sense, we all have a responsibility to, because the powerful, and I don't believe in smoky rooms, I just think industrialists, you know, there's a revolving door. I'm sure you'd agree with this. You know, for example, let's take President Obama when he's gone out of office. He will probably have contracts already drawn up to be like an advisor or a speaker or something. So powerful people, they're definitely compromised.
How do you mean by that, though? I mean, I don't see anything nefarious in I would just expect for Obama to have all of these people wanting to pay him to advise him because he was the president of the United States. Yeah,
but what if the proviso for that was that he made sure that there was no legislation that went against their interests?
Well, I mean, that's
Isn't
kind
that
of
wrong, though?
Speculating. I personally don't think Obama would be like that. That's just my personal views, but you're kind of suggesting that that's what's going to happen. But so in my mind, I would think that he would give advice. And if anyone was to pose to him, you know, something like, oh, I'll pay you this much, and as long as you try and not allow this thing to happen, then I think he would have a bit more integrity than to accept these sort of offers, especially Obama. I've got a soft spot for him.
Yeah, I think this is where we're going to differ then. Yeah. And I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. Absolutely not saying that at all. But again, going by people I know who research this very much full time. I mean, they've found, no, not full time, but a lot. They would be able to give you evidence that happens a lot, that legislation is compromised.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I was just picking on a particular Obama example. I do think that there are people who would take advantage of their high-level status and you know, that's what I mean. I'm not naive that in that I don't think no one would ever be like that. But as an example, it wouldn't be the example that I would have chosen as a politician who would be compromised. But unless you have something you want to let me know about that, that I'm not aware of.
Perhaps I'd choose him for a particular reason, because when he got in 2009, that was the time when I was very engaged, and I was kind of had my finger much more on the pulse than I do now. But for example, he got in on a platform of hope and change. And then almost as soon as he got in, it was clear that he wasn't going to do any of those things that he promised. Now, I understand perfectly politicians promise things because they have to try and get in. It costs millions of pounds, millions of dollars to become president. And when you get in there, you're immediately compromised because your donors, a lot of that money would have come from top corporations. So you're immediately compromised in terms of legislation. But I'm just going to say that I think that it's sort of healthy in a way to realize that. Maybe not good for your personal health. Going back to something you said at the beginning, I agree with you. It can affect relationships. And perhaps I'm wondering whether there's even a sort of addiction. Maybe I've got an addiction to finding the truth. Maybe that's a problem for me. If I could flip that on its head, I don't think blind compliance is healthy.
I agree. That's what I mean. There is this level way of being, you can have these. I don't think everything's working perfectly in the world and that there aren't bad things that are happening, but I do have a general tendency, and it is mainly with the mainstream conspiracy theories, like I would say, and it's quite funny to say that mainstream,
Of course,
but it really comes down to it. I think a lot of people who would like to disseminate conspiracy theories, I think you might agree that there's a lot of conspiracy type of information, media out there that is definitely false. Like, it's quite easy to see that it's false, and I think that harneshes the actual theories themselves, the ones that maybe do have some legs on them, right? That actually, that might turn out to be true one day. But there is just so much out there that, it gives conspiracy theories and theorizers like a bad name, right? And I just think that is, just I see so much of that content that I'm kind of just put off. That's my general tendency, but I mean, we've said that we have different views from the beginning, and
of course,
and
but there's no problem with that. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm not here to set you up, and I'm not trying to. And I think that thing with Obama, maybe that's an interesting point of difference, because I was, although I'm British, I do believe that American politics is very important, because you could almost broadly say there's a NATO worldview where Britain tends to follow America. I teach a lot of French people English. The French government tends to follow America. Australia tends to follow America. And I was actually 32 when he came in, but I was perhaps the most wide-eyed 32-year-old you'd ever seen, And I was kind of getting that feeling I was talking about earlier, where I'm getting some truth, finally, And I was just so disappointed when he actually came in, and he started dropping drones on Pakistan, and, he didn't close Guantanamo Bay, and he said he would. Obama has actually prosecuted more whistleblowers than every other president before him. I don't know about Trump, to be honest. So that was kind of my disappointment.
Yeah, I was disappointed with them things as well, actually. Yeah, no, I agree with you on them points, yeah.
Yeah. I do question whether it's good for my health. I totally agree with you. All I'd argue is that I consider myself something of a researcher, whereas there are a lot of people out there, and the people that you're talking about that just latch onto it. It's kind of like, you must have seen Life of Brian, right? Monty Python's Life of Brian. The whole comment about religion, they got into a lot of trouble because it was supposed to be anti-Jesus. They said the whole point is people blindly following. So whether it's Jesus or Brian, one of the classic lines, he says, you're all different. And they all shout together, yes, we're all different. And they're all shouting it together.
Yeah.
That's the hilarious thing about it. It's such a work of genius. Where should we go from here? Let's have a look. Yes. If you don't mind me quoting Karen Douglas again, sorry to pick on her, but I'd love to talk to her in the future. But she said, belief in conspiracy theories correlates with believing the world is unjust. Now, at present, I don't know what the latest statistic, but something like the 50 richest people in the world have the same wealth as the poorest half of the world. So that's 50 people have the same wealth as about 3.5 billion people. And one of the things in Zeitgeist, I don't know if you remember, do you remember John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Is that in the third one?
I think it's in the second one.
Okay. I can only remember the third one in a bit more detail, because that one I quite liked, because it was less making claims, but just actually stating like, this is the way the world works. And it was actually, and you said that they had actual experts on that one. And I things like that's number 3 I still think it has some flaws here and there, but for the most part, I did quite like that one, and I really like the ending of 3. I think it's Addendum. Is that what? Was that number 2?
Addendum was the second one. Yeah.
Okay, it's the third one then. Moving Forward, right? Yeah.
Moving Forward. Yeah.
And but yeah, I quite like the really idealistic solution to it at the end. You know, having a world
resource-based economy.
Resource-based economy. Yeah.
I don't think for a second that Peter Joseph is naive. And by the way, his latest film is called Inter-Reflections. I think you'd really like that, especially on Vimeo. It's for you and the listeners. Inter-Reflections. It's really good stuff. He's a fantastic filmmaker. Anyway, yeah, in Zeitgeist 2, this is John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he talks about how, and I think this is fairly well proven, you know, that American corporations and banks, they offer loans to third world countries and then they corrupt the leader. Marcos in the Philippines is a perfect example. And what happens is that all the money goes to the corporations for rebuilding, and then the leader also gets taken care of, and the people suffer because they get these loans that they're never going to be able to pay back, right? Now, again, just to answer Karen's point, that to me seems incredibly unjust. I kind of felt like she's perhaps almost pathologizing that worldview, that the world is unjust. I mean, the world is incredibly unjust. I mean, you wouldn't know it where I live. I actually have a discussion group, you know, it's a meetup group. We have really, really good discussions. But I'd say if you ask the average person here, they probably wouldn't tell you the world is unjust because they've done very well from the system.
Yeah.
There's that you got to factor in as well. But, you know, I think the world is incredibly unjust. And whether it's good for me to think about that a lot is, you know, it's a big question. But
just going to comment on that. So I think that's a paper that Karen's done as well, looking at the belief in an unjust world and its relationship with conspiracy belief. Now, I haven't looked at that paper in a long time, so I can't remember the details of it. But just going off of what you were saying, that, I mean, it seems like a bit of an obvious one, right? Like, if you believe that the world is unjust, then you're more likely to believe conspiracy theories, because that's what conspiracy theories basically say, right? That the world is unjust. Like, there's governments doing this and that, pharmaceutical companies taking advantage of people. So, you know, them two, they just seem like they match pretty well. But I guess the point is that if people have this view where they constantly are seeing the world as unjust, that's the relationship there that links it with conspiracy belief. Because, you know, I think even people that aren't well researched or looking up world affairs, I think a lot of people would understand that there is unjust things that happen in the world. You know, there is bad things that happen. But on the whole, you know, lives are improving. I know that it doesn't seem like that, but we are living longer. There's more wealth for people. And don't get me wrong, that's not equally distributed around the world. You know, as you're saying, you just said you're fine in Kent, you know, like, and I think, you know, but there will be pockets of people even in England that aren't doing well. So it's not, it swings and roundabouts, right? But basically, generally the world is getting better. There's less wars, you know, world wars we're talking about. Obviously there are wars going on. But generally the world is, and I can't think of any stats to point at, but I have seen them before, so I can't think of what to say to go and have a look at. But I've seen that there are measures of well-being in the world, and basically less wars. So the world is getting better. So I guess that depends on your, maybe I don't have this unjust world belief, right? You know, I do understand that there are unjust things going on in the world, but I don't think that that's the overall, you know, I feel like the world is kind of getting better. Maybe that's what our relationship means, is it's for people who really just see the world as unjust and don't see many positives in it, right? Yeah.
But let me say, first of all, that I'm not in that bracket of the people in Kent who are doing really well out of the system, because I'm doing all right. I'm hanging on. But I was just saying that in my discussion group, you know, this is not the best place in the world to have that kind of discussion, because people generally are, I mean, I'm renting an apartment, but people have got their own fairly big house. You know, they're not going to want to rock the system. I'm not knocking them for that. Probably going to have to agree to disagree, because I think one thing that's worrying me greatly is the rise of surveillance, you know, and some people don't care about that. Some people do. That's one area that I'm very worried about. I just feel bureaucracy is creeping in, and we are finding a lot of our freedoms being eroded, but it happens so gradually. You know, it's the boiling frog analogy is well used. Like, if you put a frog in boiling water, it will leap out. Put it in cold water and gradually turn it up, it will boil. Probably wouldn't, in fact. It would leap out at some point. But
A lot of people use that analogy, and I don't really know the science behind it. I think maybe they would stay in, but...
No, I don't think the science works. I think it would leap out. But
okay.
if you got a really...
you would imagine that.
Yeah, if you got a really compliant frog, it probably would stay in. But no, the idea is that, let's say if you looked at a screenshot of an internet page from 10 years ago, which I would love to do, maybe it's available somewhere. I think we'd be amazed how much more advertising there is, or how different it is.
Oh yeah.
It's like if you don't meet someone for 10 years and you see them and suddenly they've got grey hair or they're balding or whatever, but we don't notice day by day, and what worries me greatly,
I remember being younger when there was no adverts on YouTube, and always just thinking, this is just like amazing, it's nice and free, but always had in my mind that surely this is just going to totally change at some point. And and now look at it, it's like now there's like 2 adverts now before you can watch your YouTube video. It's really annoying. Yeah,
it will slowly creep in where you can't skip them either. It's coming.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. Like there's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say. There's always a price. And just to have an internet connection and have access to all this,
I mean, it makes sense that they had to monetize it at some point, right? Because, as I was saying, before there was any adverts on YouTube, I was thinking, how on earth are you making money? How is Facebook making money? I mean, they were, I don't know, through some means, but it wasn't going to sustain them, especially if they're going to have 3 billion people on their platform, which I think Facebook is near. Yeah,
because people think that advertising doesn't work as well. But my argument is, you'll know this, I'm sure, subliminal advertising is much more potent, I think, than in-your-face advertising. I don't think people see a picture of a hamburger or something in the street and then rush off to McDonald's, but it sticks in your head. It's subliminal advertising is a really, really fascinating topic. I mean, it's amazing, and it's so subtle. But something just popped in my head actually when we were talking earlier about being skeptical of the world, and that sort of perhaps it's a fine line between, it's like one man's skeptic is another man's paranoid. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. That kind of idea where you could be labeled as something that's unhealthy where you think it's healthy. Let me give you an example. If you just said, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago that Facebook is almost there to take our data, like we're giving all our data away, you probably would have been written off as paranoid. But if you ask the average person, I think they would probably accept that. Would you agree with that?
As in, that's their main interest, is to take your data away?
One of their main, not take your data away.
It's definitely
gather data.
Yeah, it helps to, it informs their business now, right? Like the algorithms and things like that. So I'd say it's definitely a main part of their business is now collecting our data. Yeah. I would say that. I think they just use that to improve their service that they have. The more that they know about their users, the more that they can tailor the experience. I know I probably sound like I'm working for Facebook here now. But what is the issue with this then, do you think? Where does it become like something bad?
Because it's gradually eroding freedoms because our data is available.
But how does it, I'm not sure how that would affect.
I call that an invasion of privacy.
Freedom.
I call it an invasion of privacy, basically. Okay. And a lot of things that are very convenient, if you take what I would consider a relatively harmless thing, like your YouTube feed brings you up videos of your interests. Suggestions, sorry, that's the word I was looking for. But I think also convenience is used almost to increase surveillance. And if you take, it's such a huge topic, microchip technology and things like that. Quote unquote conspiracy theories were talking about that 10 to 20 years ago, that, we might end up in the end with a microchip under our skin. Not sure I believe that, but microchip technology is in passports, it's in things like that. Yeah. I'm just saying that's quite a concern for me. And I also, my belief with corporations, and I think this is a fact, corporations are essentially there to make profits. Now,
I agree with that.
Does that mean the people in corporations are all evil? No. But, let's take, I don't know, Jeff Bezos, for example. He has unimaginable wealth, okay? But have you seen the videos or the testimonies of Amazon factory workers?
I haven't seen the videos, but I've heard some, pretty horrible things about their working conditions, and not just the factory workers, but also drivers as well, having to go to toilet in bottles instead of stopping to go to a toilet. because they need to get all these deliveries out. I'm aware of their overwork, Amazon stuff.
Yeah, and I just refuse to believe that Jeff Bezos couldn't do something about it if he really wanted to. That's all I'm saying. I think it's not that he's evil. I don't think Bill Gates is evil. I don't think Steve Jobs is evil. But I think, again, to use a very old proverb, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Can we do like a takeaway from this conversation? Perhaps if you want to give it like a message about conspiracy theories, and I'll give my message.
Yeah, we can do. I would just say that it's not naive to think that there are bad things that happen, talking governments as well. And not just governments in different countries, even at home, the United Kingdom here, or businesses. But my take home would really be then, if you are doing your own research, and that term gets used a lot, right? I'm doing my own research. I do research as well myself. Yeah. That's what doing a PhD is I do research. But maybe the way I do research is going to be different to how you do research, or other conspiracy theorizers or conspiracy researchers, if that wants to be the term. Just really, really, look at the sources that you're using and just seeing if they are credible sources. That's the most important thing, right? Because you can't base your claims and your arguments off of evidence that's come from a source that isn't reliable, right? So, if you are going to do your own research, make sure that source is reliable. Because if you're going to try and, convince me of it, I'm going to look to that source, and if it's not credible, then you're not going to convince me.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, just to make clear, I wasn't trying to convince you today. I think we've had a nice discussion. We found some points of agreement and points of disagreement, which is great. My takeaway, which would just be old news to my audience, I just think that there's a hell of a lot that's gone on in history and is happening right now that you will not find on the nightly news or on, let's say, I don't know, if you're in England, BBC and Sky, if you're in America, CNN, there's an incredible amount that's going on in the world that you won't see covered there. And if it is covered, it will probably be covered in a disparaging way. So that's my takeaway to you and my audience. And I think be skeptical. I agree with you that you shouldn't harm your health. You shouldn't do it to the point where you're going to get estranged from your family and estranged from your friends. If you do research this quite a bit, you might find some people drift out of your life. But I don't think your best friends, if they're really your best friends, they're probably going to stick with you and accept that's what you're doing with your time or whatever. And, again, let me make it clear. You're absolutely right. When people say research, some people take that as watching YouTube videos. I get that. Totally. Watching Zeitgeist is not research. It's watching an entertaining film that has some elements of truth and some stuff that's very hard to prove. And, I don't spend loads of time. I wish I could probably spend a bit more. And I don't spend it in a sort of paranoid, delusional world. I'm just, for one, I'm very curious. And, I just want to learn about the world and learn about myself. I'm very interested in personal psychology as well. So anyway, I just want to say thank you very much for doing this and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation, and especially with our, somewhat different views. But I think that's what's made this a great conversation. So that's been good. And I hope everything goes well for you as well. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.